Hi. I've been through some stuff and have retold this story a bunch of times now to various friends and coworkers, and I'm just kind of sick of telling it over and over again. I want to have a cohesive and easy to digest breakdown of my last 2 years. People have been asking where I've been and what's been happening, and just, I feel like I am finally in the clear, and so here it is. As a disclaimer, I will be removing the names of those involved, the company that I rented from, due to legal proceedings that may occur. I have discussed with a tenant lawyer the following issues and what to say regarding this and what not to say. I also want to mention that I do understand how lucky and privileged I am to have received the help that I did, and that there are far worse issues going on right now. And if anyone watching this looks down on the homeless, but you've had a quote, move back in with your parents, unquote phase, the only difference between them and you is that you had someone to catch you when you fell. And with all that being said, let's get into it. A couple of years back, I was living with two roommates. One moved out, and I discussed with the remaining roommate the option of finding a smaller space or finding a new third roommate, as we couldn't afford our current apartment between the two of us. He mentioned to me he was looking at buying a house and he would rent a room to me instead. After a discussion about it, this seemed like a wonderful opportunity, and I let him search for a house. I personally don't know much about the process of buying a house, but I knew it took time, so I didn't question much when it wasn't brought up again. At one point, a month or so later, though, we were talking about it, and I believe there was a miscommunication, as I took this conversation as, quote, house is a done deal, put in our notice, unquote, so I did and let my roommate know. He didn't question it either, and we had a move out date. So as the eviction date grew closer, I asked if we had a move in date for the house, but it soon became glaringly apparent that I had put in the notice way too early and we would soon have nowhere to stay. My roommate moved back in with his parents, and I, along with my four cats at the time, needed somewhere to go. I had been living paycheck to paycheck, so I had zero savings, and to top it all off, I had just recently lost my job, so I was unable to afford first and last month's rent at a new location very quickly. Ontario, for those who don't know, has this first and last month's policy, in that you pay the last month's rent as a deposit and you have until your move in date to pay your first month's rent. Then, when you move out of this rental property, your last month's rent had already been paid, so you don't have to pay the last month that you're living there. But this meant that I was about to be homeless and without a job. My mom lived in a small apartment with two cats of her own, and I hadn't really been on good terms with my dad at this point. I didn't really have anywhere to go that I could take my pets with me, and I was beginning to panic because I really didn't want to have to rehome them, as I've been their forever home since they were kittens. Luckily, two amazing friends stepped up and told me I could live with them and board my cats in a bedroom until I got back on my feet, just to keep them separated from their pets. I had until May to move out, which was around 5 months, as they were only house sitting for one of their parents and they were returning. The parents were returning at that time. I found a job at Starbucks, and although I was living out of boxes for months, I was able to pitch in rent here and there and also did chores as needed to earn my keep. I did not realize how terrible the housing market was, though, and struggled to find an affordable living space. I eventually did find one I could only just barely afford by myself, though unfortunately it was only available on June 1st, as the previous tenant was still living there. I needed to find a spot for a month, since I had to be out by May, or get the money to board the cats in a kennel. Somehow, I got lucky, and my freaking sister had just moved into her boyfriend's place and out of her current apartment, and she had until June to move. She was pretty much mostly moved out, so I was able to stay in her almost empty apartment until my move date. Two other amazing friends helped me with my first and last month's rent situation, and I moved all of my things for the second time in a year to this new location, my sister's apartment. Then, after a month, I moved all my things again into my new apartment on June 1st. I was just so relieved to have an apartment of my own again, and I had been in and out of boxes for so long. 3 moves in a 6 month span, it was a lot. But to my horror, it only just started. A week after moving into this apartment, a brick was thrown through the front entrance door. An assault on my upstairs neighbor occurred, and I heard it all through my ceiling. The day after, that neighbor came down to apologize for the noise, which I appreciated, but I noticed he had 2 black eyes. I felt sorry for him, heard him out, and offered kindness. Sadly, he took this as flirting and proceeded to knock on my door daily and try to message me constantly. I was starting to feel harassed in my new home, mere days after moving in, and I had just been through moving and stress hell. I did not need this. I spoke to my neighbor and cleared the air, and luckily he understood and left me alone. I dropped it and went on with my life. It was just a lot of stress. That's just another stressor. Anyway, shortly after this, I got a job as a receptionist, which gave more hours and better pay, so I quit Starbucks, thinking that this was a permanent position. But unfortunately, 3 months later, I was not kept after my probationary period, so now I was without a job again, and during these 3 months, we got a new neighbor in apartment 20. Apartment 20 was something. I had never in my life had a neighbor so vile and disrespectful. He would have a crowd of people over every single day, all night, and I'm not exaggerating here, it was every day and night. They had no sense of indoor voices, and the doors are paper thin at this apartment, so we could hear them all the time. He would loudly yell up and down the halls to the rest of the tenants that if we dared complain, he would kill us all. Many complaints were made to the landlords by not just me, but everyone on the floor, regardless of his threats. I was terrified to leave my home in case I ran into him. He would always be screaming and yelling in the hallways from his apartment, blasting his music 24/7. Like, I'm not even exaggerating, it was constant. In fact, one time I heard him leave, as they were always loud about it, but his music was still blasting in his unit. Then some maintenance people from the building came to ask him to turn it down and were banging on his door for what seemed like a good 5 minutes. I finally popped my head out of my door and told them that he left shortly before they arrived. They took a statement from me, and one of them even said, quote, "We got to get this guy out of here," unquote. At this point, I had started doing my laundry in the sink and hang drying in my tub. I had run into him multiple times and caught him shooting up in the laundry room and was afraid of running into him while he was under the influence. He was already erratic and threatening. Drugs might only further this behavior. Now, I in no way shame anyone for their drug use. I have many loved ones who struggle with addiction, but this was a stranger to me whose temperament I did not know, and he had already threatened us all. I was pretty afraid. At some point, I also caught someone taking my clothes out of the dryer, but that was just another incident that was unrelated. Just more stress. I believe his reign of terror, apartment 20 that is, was around 4 months long-ish. He was finally evicted. I discovered his name from another neighbor, and out of curiosity, I Googled it, and I found this. This proves to me that my landlords don't do any form of, well, they didn't do any form of background check on this guy, and they likely never did background checks on anyone, because the people who moved in after were almost worse. But okay, between then and here, I do want to report at this point I had found a job as a receptionist again, and I love my current team. If not for them, I don't know how this would have ended or where I would have been. I did, however, invest in a security camera for my apartment. I was told, as you can see here, that we would have security cameras installed in the whole building following the whole apartment 20 thing, but that never happened. So I took it upon myself to get one for me. I really couldn't afford it yet, but my safety and my pet's safety were my number one priority at this point. Okay, so now we have a new neighbor. A drug dealer moved in following apartment 20's eviction. He would make copies of his key, we found out, to give to his customers, so that they would not need to buzz in every time they wanted to buy. But this led to squatters, people high out of their minds wandering the hallways at all hours, physical and violent fights that I heard right outside my apartment door, and many attempts at break-ins. I remember one night I was scrolling on my phone in bed with all the lights off. It was like 3 a.m. I was just trying to sleep, and my door handle rattled as if someone was trying to open it. Of course, it was locked, but by the time I got to my peephole, this person had moved down to the next door, and I could hear them trying that door, and then the next, etc. One time, I also had a very drunken man try to kick my door in, demanding entry. Apparently, he was a friend of someone else's and just had the wrong apartment, but this was super stressful and unnerving regardless. Anyway, once the dealer was also evicted, my landlords had to change the entry lock and give everyone new keys. Great, right? I got my new key and thought, wait, this key looks really familiar. And it was, because it was my apartment key, like my personal unit key. I can't fucking believe this. New key. Every single person in the apartment. They had changed the front door entrance to be the exact same lock as the bolt lock for my personal apartment. Everyone in the building now had a key to my unit. I was already dealing with so much stress up until this point. I couldn't believe that this was such a mess. I reported it to my landlords and had the maintenance guy come and change my lock again, and didn't realize that he had changed both locks on my front handle. I had a bolt lock and a door handle lock, and only the bolt lock was the same. But he had changed both and didn't tell me, and I didn't realize. Anyway, the reason this is important is because I only ever received a key for the bolt lock. The handle lock I didn't get given a new key for, but I also didn't realize that it wasn't changed. So, cue a day later, when I get home from a friend's around like 11, I think, and cannot get into my unit since I only had the one working key. I called maintenance, who didn't answer. It was too late. The emergency after-hours line then told me they would send a locksmith. An hour later, none had arrived yet, and I did not trust my area, obviously, so I called one myself. Paid out of pocket, which, remember, I had just gone through 2 new jobs and was not nearly financially set enough to afford this at this time. The landlords never sent their locksmith the whole night. I submitted my receipt for reimbursement, which they did apply, but only to my rent. Whatever, I was in, and I told them I didn't have this key. Should all be good, right? But no, I still never got a new key. I just couldn't use one of my locks anymore. I was struggling to afford even food at this point because I had to go and do all these emergency things that I couldn't really afford. I relied on offerings from friends and felt immense guilt and shame for this, as I was unsure when I'd be able to pay them back. I had tried so hard to smile through it, like it could be worse, but the now 2 years of constant stress really took its toll. At some point during all of this, one of my elderly cats needed to be put down. I was hospitalized for 3 days after a very rough tooth extraction from the dentist. Just a lot of stress and a lot of personal things I had to go through that I just really didn't have the emotional toll for. I have never felt like I was in survival mode, but I think I definitely was. I couldn't cry. I remember I tried because I know the stress relief that follows after crying, but I just couldn't. I was so numb, even with medication. But then out of nowhere, 2 childhood friends of mine reached out, knowing vaguely of the situation. I didn't really like to talk about it and make people worry, but they told me they were buying a house and wanted me to move in with them. As you can probably guess, I was immensely skeptical given what happened last time, but to my surprise, it really did work out. My friends bought their first home, congrats to them, and I am currently renting a bedroom, typing out this story to read out loud one last time. I was due to move mid-December when I got this news. right before Christmas. I just had to wait it out until then and just kind of deal with this constant harassment, break-in attempts, whatever, until then. I was always scared. This entire time, I was in fight or flight mode. If I was home, I worried about a break-in and assault. If I was away, I still worried about a break-in and harm to my pets. It made it very difficult to focus on work and be as reliable as they needed me to be. Funny enough, we had a break-in at work. That was very triggering. Not related, just, bad area, I guess. I was in the worst mental state I think I've ever been in my life, and I am still recovering today. A week or two prior to my move date, I was sitting by myself, I guess I didn't look very well. And a very generous acquaintance in my life asked me if I was okay. And for the first time in this entire time, I broke down crying. I let it all out and explained what had been going on at home for like the millionth time. And unexpectedly, this person made me feel like family to them. Even though we were not close or anything like that, we weren't friends, we never hung out. This person offered to put me and my pets in a pet-friendly hotel close to my work until my move date. That way, I could at least feel personally safe before moving, and if there is a break-in, the only thing there is replaceables. I will forever be grateful to this person. They know who they are. I felt like I could actually sleep for the first time in years. There were times I remember I would be on Discord with Crawford and have to tell him, one sec, and just be quiet and pause my game or pause the stream because I didn't want anyone in the hallway hearing that I had gaming equipment or that I was even home. I didn't want to draw attention to myself in any way for fear of my personal safety, my pets, the break-ins, any of that. Little behavior and routine changes that I didn't realize were like coping mechanisms I now have to unlearn. I didn't even carry a purse for the last 2 years for fear of being robbed or attacked while out on the streets. I shoved everything in my pockets, and now my pockets are overflowing. But either way, just little things. Last but not least, that maintenance man who changed my locks decided to text me personally that he was thinking of me. We are not friends. We do not chat. This man knew I lived alone and had a key to my unit and was aware of all of the break-in attempts I had already gone through. This text, while not nefarious in itself, was extremely unprofessional, and given everything that I had already gone through, it made me very uncomfortable, and it scared me even more. I never responded to him, and I just left. Now, I live in a big house with my best friends, and all of my pets are safe. Fourth move in the span of 2 years, but I'm recovering. I reported all of this to my landlords in a very lengthy email with receipts and screenshots of every report I made. They clearly did not care about tenant safety, and I was already juggling so much when I got there. What I thought was the end to my stress only became the catalyst, and I still jump at every noise. I still get nightmares and wake up feeling like I have to pack and I am about to move again. I feel like I need to be quiet all the time and not bring attention to myself still, even when nobody can hear me. Recording this feels very strange and uncomfortable still because I don't know who's listening. I still struggle with trust and still am struggling to financially recover enough to repay those that helped me when I needed it most. But I do have a stable job and income, so it will happen once I'm back on my feet. I am so grateful to the friends I have and the people in my life who supported me on this journey through a financial and living crisis I would never wish on anyone. Thank you for taking the time to listen. It does mean a lot to me, and I hope that at some point in my life I can laugh about this because, man, what a wild time.